Good morning, Flagler. The doctors are in. I'm Dr. Scott
And
Klioze,
I'm Dr. Andria Klioze.
and we are here once again to talk about your health and health issues right here in Flagler, Volusia, St. Johns County, and this time, actually, the world. We've got a special
Woohoo!
guest with us today. Dr. Andrew, why don't you introduce our special guest?
Well, Darryl Edwards is phenomenal movement coach, researcher, and founder of Primordial Play Method. And I met him at an obesity conference several times, actually. And I've been wanting to get him to be on this podcast for a very long time. And he's an amazing individual and has really studied the evolution of movement and how it's built into biology and physiology and neuroscience, and also involved in play psychology. And just recently, I was reading an article about the blue zones, and these people who live long and extensive lives, they don't see movement as something they need to do in the sense of going to the gym and a responsibility thereof. They see it as a necessity, but they also incorporate fun in life. So, with that, I would like to have Darryl tell us a little bit more about himself and what he does and what he's able to accomplish with people that have been disabled.
Yes, well, thank you so much for the introduction. So as you mentioned, I'm the founder of the Primal Play Method, which is based on four pillars of evidence. So the first is evolutionary biology or evolutionary fitness, how humans evolved to move in the environments that they evolved into. So movement was for survival, for hunting and gathering food, for building shelter, for locomotion, to be generalists of movement. So in comparison to the rest of the animal kingdom, most of our movement capabilities are quite poor. So we're pretty slow. We're not very strong. We can't swim as well as the greatest of sea animals. You could go on, but in terms of movement generalists, we can take on movement forms modeling the rest of the animal kingdom. So we can walk, we can crawl, we can climb, we can run, sprint, jump, lift, carry. We have all these movement capabilities, and I think modeling that in the 21st century is really important. Modeling those movement patterns. The second is exercise physiology, which is the science of movement and physical activity, and gives us an idea, a lens into how movement primes the body. How is our physiology affected by physical activity or the lack thereof? Thirdly, cognitive neuroscience. So, how do our brains respond to movement? How do our hormones respond to movement? How does our cognition respond to movement? And then finally, using play psychology. So, taking some of that heavy, lifting of those disciplinary sciences and using play psychology to make that bitter pill of medicine a little bit easier to swallow. So that's the primal play method. And my implementation of that is really, how can I get individuals to focus on the power of movement as medicine? How can it be used for prevention? Fairly easy, fairly robust scientific evidence in relation to that, but also as a therapeutic measure. So we have disciplines in relation to, say, cardiometabolic health or exercise oncology, or using exercise for neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis. So there are all these disciplines now that are aligned to utilizing physical activity as medicine. And so that's where I position myself in helping my clients, or increasingly patients if they're referred out to me from clinicians. And it's a wonderful space to be in.
That's awesome, Darryl. I was reading an article years ago about, the great apes and primates and stuff like that. And they're figuring out, like, humans, we seem to have to move, to maintain our health and basically longevity. Whereas some of
Mm,
the other primates don't seem to have that, like uh, um, not the chimpanzees, the big ones. What are the big apes? The gorillas. The
gorillas,
gorillas
yeah.
are very sedentary. They don't move much, but they seem to do okay with that. But they think, humans through evolution have had to move basically to survive, and not like you said, not like for hunting and stuff. We're not as good as some of the other animals, but we have a lot of skill sets that we can utilize to keep us alive and functional. But they've
Yes.
found that over time that while some of these, the bonobos and the gorillas and stuff really don't do much all day, and they kind of go out and hunt or gather in brief periods, but not like us where health is really paramount on movement.
Yeah, and it's difficult to say what came first for humans, but our ability to go, to go from, to go to sort of like the earliest of our human ancestors or pre-human ancestors to Homo erectus, where we were upright and fully bipedal, and to have this ability to move efficiently on two legs, and to be able to traverse great distances. So we, unlike the other apes, we're nomadic,
Exactly. That's what the
nomadic
article said.
hunter-gatherers.
Yep.
So we're able to walk very efficiently for significant differences. And some of our ancestors would have been covering the equivalent of a marathon plus in a day, through walking. And tribes would be walking significant distances to go from an area of plenty of resources to that went to scarcity to other areas. And that's one of the reasons why there was a migration out of Africa to the rest of the world, because of this driver for exploration. So certainly movement, our evolution is heavily underpinned by this evolutionary driver to become creative around, okay, well, I'm not as great a hunter as some of the great predators, right? I'm not, like a cheetah, say, or or a lion. I really struggle, but I can invent tools, and I can
Exactly.
focus on things like persistent hunting, where I can just track animals that will fatigue if I follow them for miles and miles, where as a human I can still keep going. So we develop these capabilities to cool our bodies through sweat, to be fantastically efficient, with our walking gait, still have the ability to run and sprint, also relatively efficiently, and have all of these other movement capabilities. So I think that's one of the unique, sort of facets of human capability, is this generalist. We're generalists of movement, but we also can, think about convenience and think about shortcuts and think about optimizing our movement ability in order to achieve an objective. Whereas for our cousins in the animal kingdom, it's very much instinct, and
So
it's
like
very
an
much
adaptability. Our bodies have
yes.
adapted because we have these other technologies or these other skill sets to compensate. Has there been a
Yes.
shift in the muscle size? I mean, in evolution, I mean, obviously you can look at the ape and look at the human, but
Well,
has
Yeah.
there
Neanderthal.
been even a more obvious shift in muscle size and areas of higher levels of muscle focus?
Yeah, so the probably the best piece of work that I've read on this is by an author called Jared Diamond, who wrote a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel, and he speaks about the probably the most significant, era in human evolution was the agricultural revolution. So where we went from, the Paleolithic, Stone Age, part of our evolution, to the Neolithic, where we started to develop agriculture. And this was one of the first times where there was a significant change in body composition and our physiological makeup. So we went from taller, more leaner, more muscular humans, to ones that were impacted by the type of workload that became, we're settling down, we are, planting seeds, we have animal husbandry, we are no longer having to traverse great distances during our day to day. We're no longer, we're no longer having unsuccessful hunts. We're learning to store food and to harvest food. And so that was one significant change. And his book talks about these differences between the sort of, Paleolithic humans and agricultural humans. And then another change, probably the second most significant shift, was in the Industrial Revolution, where we became even less focused on physical labor that would occur through agriculture and farming to, being sedentary in manufacturing and into office-based work. And that was a secondary shift in kind of stature and again becoming more sedentary. And then some argue that the third shift, I think it's the Anthropocene, is the now of sort of 21st century living, the technological revolution, whereby we're the most sedentary we've ever been in human history.
100%.
And so we now study the impact of sedentary behavior on the impact of physical inactivity, which wouldn't have been a science, 2 generations ago, right? And that was really the start of the science of what happens in occupations where there's a significant amount of sedentary behavior. So you may have heard that there's a very incredible study in the 1950s by Jeremy Morris in the Lancet in 1953, and he compared London bus drivers with London bus conductors. So bus drivers were 90% of their day sedentary. Bus conductors were, up and down the stairs, collecting tickets, take passengers on and off the bus, helping with luggage, very active for their occupation. And it was a great study because that study had individuals from the same demographic, similar diet. They came from similar parts of the city, similar income. Everything else was fairly standardized between these two cohorts, apart from their levels of physical activity. And he found that there was a greater incidence of cardiovascular disease and death in bus drivers than conductors, and also the survivability of those having a cardiac event was far worse in sedentary occupations. And of course, some people argued, oh, well, that's maybe the bus drivers have more stress, because they're having to navigate the traffic all day. They have less communication, right, than say the conductor has. Maybe that's some of the reasons for the differences in mortality. So he continued the study looking at other occupations, office-based civil servants versus postal workers, and they found this similarity, this correlation between sedentary occupations, office-based occupations, and those who are more active throughout their day. And this carried on for up until the 70s, looking at sort of longitudinal studies on how humans are impacted by sedentary behavior. So there's a good, robust evidence base in the literature as to what happens when we're sedentary, but now we're starting to understand the sort of biochemistry as well. What happens at the tissue level, at the cellular level, when we're inactive? What are the benefits of moving physiologically? So that this is an exciting time for exercise physiology, because we now understand not just the fact that movement is good for us, but why, what happens, what is anti-inflammatory, what are the healing properties, what's activated through movement, and what happens when we reduce our movement or we become sedentary for most of the day.
It's funny because another article I read basically was looking at the sedentary American usual sad diet and all that stuff, and they were comparing them to the metabolism of a hunter-gatherer group in Africa, and they did some kind of radio labeling of their protein or their meals or whatever, so they could track their energy utilization. They found that the energy utilization between the sedentary guy and the hunter-gatherers, and they talked about how they were out hunting like an elephant, and they tracked them through the multiple. At the end of the day, they all expended about the same amount of energy, and they think because humans, most of our energy expenditure comes from our big brains. That's where most of that comes from. So the fallacy that going to the gym is going to help you lose weight is wrong. I mean, it's not that in and of itself, most of our energy expenditures it's all diet. But the problem with not moving is that you lose function, right? I mean, proprioception is such an important part of our lives. And as we see patients get older, when they lose the ability to orient themselves in space, they become
Yes.
unstable, and then they fall, and then they break a hip. And, you and I both know, Darryl, and Andrea knows that morbidity and mortality goes up tremendously in older individuals who fall down and break a hip. So, what you're doing is fabulous because it's getting people to preserve functionality, and I was talking to
Yes.
a fellow one time who was telling me that, we used to think proprioception was all called, and that was all stored in the lower part of the brain in the cerebellum. But there's actually parts of the upper brain, the supratentorial parts of the brain that participate in that. So the old adage, if you don't use it, you lose it, is 100% true. So as you
Yes.
see these older individuals who are extremely unstable, and then you see, we got friends of ours from church who are in their 80s. They go dancing all the time, and they act like 30-year-olds. I mean, it's just amazing.
Physiologically, their emotions, their energy, everything is amazing. The impact
cognition,
it has.
all that. All right, we're going to take a quick break. If you guys have any questions for myself or Dr. Andrea or Darryl, you can email us at the doctors in DOCTORISIN at WNZF.com. You're listening to the Doctors In on WNZF News Radio, 94.9 FM, 1550 AM. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment. And we're back. For those of you just joining us, we have a special guest with us today, Mr. Darryl Edwards. He is the founder of Primal Play Method. Very interesting program and technique that he's come up with based on his own personal research, and it seems to be very effective at keeping people healthy, moving. My wife, Andrea, has met him at one of her obesity medicine several times, and he's always a guest speaker, and she's been enthralled with Mr. Edwards since she first saw him, and she's been trying to get him on our show since that time, and we're lucky enough to have him with us today. So
right out of London.
Right out of London. Right, straight out of London.
Yep.
Right. So thank you, Darryl, for being with us.
You're
Before we
welcome.
went on a break, I was talking about the study I read. It was out of Scientific America that was talking about how basically comparing the sedentary American sitting on a couch watching TV versus hunter-gatherers in Africa who were chasing down their next meal, and how there really wasn't a tremendous amount of, difference in their energy expenditure. But, they did mention that there was some advantages to the hunter and gatherers moving all the time. And during the break, Mr. Edwards says to me, he goes, "That's not true." He goes, "I can refute that."
So we want to hear that.
He goes, "So we were going to hear what he says. There's two different camps on this, and so he's going to give us his view here."
Yeah, there's two different camps. And I suppose to make it really simple to understand, it's a bit like if you said the only way to determine if somebody is with obesity is by using BMI, and that was your position 10 years ago, everyone would have said that's a perfect way to measure obesity in an individual. Now we understand that BMI is a very poor measure of obesity. For example, Dwayne Johnson is with obesity. LeBron James would be with obesity based on their BMI. So we have more accurate measures such as body fat percentage, total muscle mass. We can do measurements like waist circumference, waist to hip ratio. So we have much better and more accurate measurements of body composition. And it's a similar argument for calorie expenditure. So the method often used in literature that's a couple of decades old doesn't accurately reflect true metabolic kind of exertion. So, for instance, if I go on a hunt with a significant amount of exertion, or if I'm in a gym and I do a HIIT session, and you measure the calorie burn during that session, isn't much of a calorie burn based on that work. But there's a post-exercise fat burning that takes place, and it called EPOC, excessive post-oxygen consumption. So this rate of accelerated calorie burn for 72 hours post-activity that isn't taken into account based on these measurements that are done in research. So that's one of the reasons for the discrepancy. The second reason is the amount of lean body mass. So the more muscle mass you have, the more calories you burn at rest. And so, yes, the brain requires a significant amount of resources, but the muscle, which is the should be a much greater proportion of our body, also has a significant metabolic rate. So our blood glucose, blood sugar, muscle is the prime utilizer of blood glucose for energy, for fuel. So these are just two reasons as to why that comparison is a very crude comparison. And actually, when you compare on a like for like basis, and you compare the levels of activity and the levels of not being sedentary outside of dietary intake, you'll find that there's a higher calorie burn during activity, post activity. There's a higher metabolic rate because of the amount of lean body mass and the lower levels of body fat percentage that exist. And there are other factors that increase the calorie burn in more active individuals than less active. And you can see that evidence, even if you don't believe me, you can kind of see that evidenced in athletes when they're on season, off season. You know, when they have higher levels of physical activity during their training, they tend to be leaner and look more athletic and have better levels of body composition than when they're in their off season. And they're probably eating similar amounts of food during those times. But of course, the additional levels of activity have a greater impact on their body composition. So that's, hopefully that gives a ballpark idea as to why
Absolutely. Oh, that was
that's
great.
refuted.
That makes more sense because I was kind of surprised when I read the article. I'm like, really? But
Yeah,
no, that's a good explanation. I can tell you
it,
from my own personal, my own personal experience, when I'm heavier, my body seems to want to be more sedentary. It's like
yes,
a vicious cycle because you get
yeah,
heavier, you don't want to do anything. And then once you get
yes,
to a point, and we have this fallacy, some of the guys in the gym I go to still think that they need to eat before they go to the gym. It's like, oh, I gotta
mm,
work, I gotta eat before I go to the gym. Like, no, your body's
Yeah.
really efficient at storing energy. But if you
yes,
have that in your head, you almost convince yourself that you're not as strong if you don't have a big protein meal before you go to the gym. So it's great
yes.
that you're out there with all the scientific data to support your methodology. So that's
So
awesome,
tell us a
Darryl.
Yeah, for
little bit,
sure.
Darryl, about how you get people from very sedentary lifestyles and saying they can't move. I have hip problems, I have knee problems. How do you get them moving? And tell us some case
Mm.
studies or case patients that you've had, that clients that you've had that really you've been able to transform, and you might have even been surprised or shocked at what you've been able to help these patients achieve.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm no longer surprised at how beneficial movement can be. And I think it usually starts with some education. So a patient in pain, osteoarthritis, or I'm dealing with cancer-related fatigue, during chemotherapy, or I have muscular, multiple sclerosis, and I'm struggling to maintain balance, for instance. So all of those examples. And so if you can educate a patient and say, well, hey, do you know that if you move, you're going to release hormones and neurotransmitters that will reduce your perception of pain? Really? Yes. You have endorphins, you have endocannabinoids that are released by your body when you move that will reduce your feelings of pain, not just physically, but mentally as well. So, okay, oh wow, so you plant that seed. Okay, so you're feeling discomfort. If you just move in a way which is not going to be increasing your levels of pain, but are going to be reducing pain, you're more likely to want to do more. So that's the first tick. I have fatigue. I feel really lethargic. How can you tell me to exercise when I just don't feel like doing anything at all? Do you know that movement will, reduce your levels of fatigue? It will actually promote energy for your cells within the body. Oh, I had no idea. Okay, so next try that prescription and see. And so once patients realize they can receive this positive feedback and, oh, I now have more energy, I now want to do more. So I for me, it's a bit of a, as we say, a suck it and see approach.
Mm-hmm.
I say these are the benefits for you based on the conditions, based on your symptoms, based on what we're trying to achieve. Here's a prescription to alleviate those issues. What happens once you do it? What happens when you don't? So it's a full, it's a prophecy that they themselves fulfill or don't, as the case may be. So they're aware they have control over what movement can do for them. I'm just a facilitator. I just provide a prescription. And once individuals follow that prescription, they're like, oh, wow, yeah, we had no idea this is what would happen. I had no idea I would feel less pain. I had no idea I could improve my balance in this way, that I can improve my physical function.
Do you
So
actually measure the endorphins, the cannabinoids, or motor activity, pain? Do you do a satisfaction scale or a movement scale just to show them, to
yes,
validate not only what they feel they're experiencing, but like a scientific analysis for them to be able to see?
yes. So I don't use any of the kind of formalized kind of scales that are out there. I
Pain
tend to
scales,
do a
yeah.
very simple scale of 1 to 10.
Uh-huh.
So keep a pain diary, keep a fatigue diary, keep a stress diary, whatever it is that's important for us to focus on. I just say keep a simple spreadsheet from 1 to 10, 1 being no impact, 10 being debilitating impact. And that tends to work very well for individuals to keep track of.
We do the same thing, Darryl. I mean, when we're
Yeah.
doing some kind of pain medicine for injection, we're just trying to see their pre-procedural pain level post it. And it's, subjective, but it is, effective, I think. So we got
Yes.
about 2 minutes left. I just want to, one of the pioneers in your field predicted this stuff back in like the early 1930s was Albert Einstein. Do you remember his famous quote? Do you know what he
Which
said?
no,
Albert Einstein.
no.
Albert Einstein was writing a letter to his son, I think in like 1930 or sometime a couple of, 15 years after his, great, discoveries. And he said,
Mm.
life is like riding a bike. To maintain balance, you got to keep moving. That was a quote from
Oh,
Albert Einstein.
love it.
Isn't that
Yeah,
awesome? So even
that's a
back in
great quote.
1930, he predicted what you're doing right now. So that's
Yeah.
awesome.
And as we're kind of coming to a close, I would say that probably the most important aspect of the work that I do is ensuring that the movement patterns I prescribe are fun and engaging and playful. So it's tapping into an individual's inner child, how they, recapturing the joy of movement they experience as children.
That's
And if you
awesome.
can recapture that as an adult, you are going to want to continue to do this. You are going to want to share that experience with your family, with your peers. So that's my sort of USP. It's like, right, we've got this fantastic medicine of movement, but how do I get you to want to do this and not to feel as if you're punishing yourself or that it's painful or
Exactly.
it's uncomfortable? Let's make it fun. And then you're more likely to go, I'm enjoying this. And again, your perception of pain, your perception of hard work, all of that is
Forget.
pushed to one side and you're focusing on the joy. So for me, the most important aspect of movement to ensure maintenance and sustainability of movement is to focus on fun and joy
Awesome.
and something that you want to repeat
Daryl, really
rather than
quick, we
to
got
endure.
about 30 seconds left. Can you give us, if people want to reach out to you, see your website,
Yes.
what do you have? How can they find you?
Yeah, best place is my website, primalplay.com. If you want to find out a bit more about my philosophy, I have a TED Talk, Why Working Out Isn't Working Out. It's got over, I think, 1.3 million views now. So if you'd like to increase that view count, please have a look at it. And I have 2 best-selling books, one for adults called Animal Moves, and I have a children's picture book called My First Animal Moves.
Awesome. All right, Darryl
Thank you
Edwards and
so
Primal.
much.
Hey, that was awesome,
Phenomenal. We
brother.
need to have you on again, and I'm going to push OMA so we can get you on there
And
as
we're
a
going to come see you
speaker
over in
again.
London there
Yes.
and get us
Oh,
moving.
for
And we're going to
sure.
have some tea, but we're going to be moving.
I'm going to the
Yeah,
pub.
that sounds
after.
great. All 3 of those idea suggestions would be fantastic. Thank you so much,
All right,
Andrea and
Darryl.
Scott, and
All
real
right,
pleasure.
guys. If you have any questions from me, Dr. Andria, or Darryl Edwards, give us a shout out over at Doctors Are In, DOCTORISIN at WNZF.com. As always, stay happy, stay healthy. We'll see you next time. The doctors are out.